Hey, Bastish B here for 64K and welcome to another episode of New Retro. So if you've never seen this show before, I take a look at a newly released game on an old classic system, and then we have a look at the game that might have inspired it, the inspiration game. And today's games are... Okay, so let's first check out the original game. Manic Miner was released in 1983 by Bug Software on the ZX Spectrum. It immediately became an instant classic on the system and was ported to almost every computer at the time, including the original C64 version. It was programmed by Matthew Smith, whose main character, Miner Willie, would go on to be in two other well-received games of the same style, namely Jet Set Willie 1 and 2. The C64 version was basically a direct port, or as close to the Spectrum look as the Commodore could do. You control Willie as you try to survive 20 caves full of underground creatures and collect treasures before your air runs out. It required pinpoint accuracy for jumps, a character that dies instantly with one wrong move, and the constant stress of your air ticking down, which made playing it a really tough task. Manic was definitely a product of the European gaming scene at the time, and looks, sounds, and is brutally difficult, and it just fits in with so many games of that time, and was definitely an inspiration for a lot of other games in the similar vein, like Monty on the Run, for example. Software Projects did the C64 conversion, and they were also responsible for publishing the sequels, Jet Set 1 and 2, after Matthew Smith left Bugbot and took the character rights with him. And now let's take a look at the new version. Manic Miner 64DX was released in the last week of December 2019 by programmer Graham Axton, who also did the excellent platform ROM, The Bare Essentials, which was released through Pond Software a few years ago on the Commodore 64. This is an unofficial update to the original conversion of Manic Miner to the C64 by Software Projects. First up, you'll notice the awesome title loader screen, which mimics the original C64 cover for the game. Overall, the improvements are many, including a much closer look to the original Spectrum version, a vastly improved soundtrack which now sounds more like a C64 game and is a welcome update to your bleeding ears. There is also a built-in trainer menu to help or to cheat your way through this brutally tough game. But the best option is the ability to choose between the original 1983 C64 version or this new updated version, which is an awesome addition. This is a really well-made labor of love to the original, and actually made me appreciate just how well designed this game was, especially from a level design point of view. So if you've never played Manic Miner before, then this is an excellent place to start. And you should also check out Graham on Twitter at ZXMutant64, and I'll leave a link in the description and one to the game, so be sure to check them out. So you're probably wondering, where do I find these games? As for an original copy, as per usual, eBay is usually your best bet. The prices are all over the place, but it's mostly pretty cheap. And for the 64DX version, it's unofficial, so therefore it's free as a digital download. And I'll leave a link to csdb.dk so you can get it. And thanks for joining me, Bastish B at 64K. If you can like and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time. Cheers. Hey, Bastish B here for 64K and welcome to another episode of New Retro. And if you've never watched this series before, basically I take a look at a new retro game on an old system, and then I go back and check out the game that might have inspired it. And today's games are... So let's first check out the original game. Attic Attack is an arcade-style action maze game originally released in 1983 by Ultimate Play the Game on the ZX Spectrum and BBC Micro's computers. The game was made by the Stamper brothers, Tim and Chris, with Tim on writing duties and Chris on graphics. And we looked at another one of the early classics in episode 3 of this series called Jetpack. This was one of the many Ultimate games that remained on the original format and never got a C64 release. The game's goal is to escape this maze-like castle, which involves you searching rooms for items and pieces of the golden key, which you need 3 of to escape the castle for good. The game is really fast-paced with shoot-'em-up style action and plenty of hidden secret rooms to find and floors to explore. It had a very arcade feel, which is appropriate, as the Stamper brothers worked in the arcade industry before setting up Ultimate. You also get the choice between 3 characters, which was quite a unique option for the time, especially in such an early game. Not only do you have to contend with all manner of monsters in the castle, but also boss characters, and the fact that you can also die of starvation. So picking up food is vital to your health, as it's always ticking down gauntlet style. The game was the 7th release by the team in 1983, and they were known to be extremely dedicated in making the best products they could, as seen by this quote by Tim Stamper in a 1988 issue of Crash magazine. "We were so busy producing a few products a year and making sure they were right. I think while we were full-time Ultimate, we only had 2 Christmas mornings off, and that's how hard it was. We worked 7 days a week, 8 AM till 1 or 2 in the morning. I don't feel it's any good having engineers who only work 9 to 5, because then you get a 9 to 5 game." The game was received really well in Crash magazine and C+VG, plus many other publications of the time, and I think the combination of the fast arcade style gameplay and Ultimate's unique style of their box art and advertising always made their games appeal to many people, not only for the quality but also that air of mystery that surrounded them. And now let's look at the retro remake. 37 years after its original release, we finally get a port of Attic Attack to the C64. And when I say port, I mean that in the most basic sense, as this version is greatly enhanced over the original, from its excellent colorful C64 style graphics, which are well animated, and the cool atmospheric music. The gameplay is still the same though, as you get to choose between a wizard, surf, and knight, as in the original, running around finding secret rooms behind bookshelves, blasting beasties, and collecting items and keys to open new areas, are all here making this feel and play just like the original. This is definitely a labor of love conversion from the team of Stephen Day on graphics, who's lent his talents to so many great C64 conversions over the last few years, such as 2014's Donkey Kong Jr. and 2011's excellent Prince of Persia conversions, which I've covered in this series as well if you want to check them out. The coding was done by the highly talented Tomcat of the C64 cracking group Nostalgia, the guys that gave us the enhanced version of the Chris Butler classics Commando and Ghosts and Goblins. And this is not just a simple conversion, as it also includes some secret side missions and items added exclusively to this version. With this and all the recent enhanced ports of Ultimate games to the C64 like Knightlaw and Alien 8 amongst many more, the Commodore is getting pretty close to the entire Ultimate library available, which is a pretty amazing contribution by everybody that supports this awesome computer. Here's hoping we'll see many more years of excellent unconverted ports to this great system. And you're probably wondering, where can I get these games? So as for the original version of Attic Attack on the Spectrum, usually I would suggest going to eBay, but the prices are kind of astronomical for this game, so therefore I would suggest going to the retrocavern.com, which has the game for really cheap. I'll leave a link in the description to go straight to their page. And as for the C64 version, it's unofficial, it's fan made, so therefore it's free, and I'll also leave a link in the description to the download for that game. And thanks for joining me, Bastish B, at 64K. I hope you had a good time. If you can like and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated. And I'll see you next time. Cheers. Hey, Bastish B here for 64K, and welcome to another episode of New Retro. And if you've never watched this show before, basically I look at a new retro game that's been released on an old system, and then we look at the inspiration game, the game that might have inspired it. And today's games are... So let's first jump back and check out the inspiration game. Bomberman was originally released in 1983 by Hudson Soft. Most people associate the game with the NES and Nintendo, but that version didn't arrive until 1987. The original version was released in Japan as Bakudan Otoko on all the popular Japanese computers of the era, such as the NEC PC-8801, Fujitsu FM7, and MSX. A Japanese Famicom port eventually released in 1985 and is considered the first official console release. The NES version is seen as an upgrade of the original. The game itself was as simple as it gets, with its arcade-style maze action gameplay. Your goal is to exit each level before the time runs out, but first you have to find the exit, which involves blowing up the tiles with your bombs to try to uncover it, as well as dodging and destroying the enemies that come after you. There are also hidden items that can, for example, increase your blast radius of your bombs or speed you up, etc, etc. Overall, there were 50 levels to blast your way through, and although it's not the original version of this classic character, it's considered the true start of the series in look, style, and gameplay. The series would later become more associated with its couch co-op multiplayer modes and even later online versions. Currently, there are over 70 different games in this series, ranging from kart races to adventure games and many other genres. And now let's look at the new retro-inspired game. With such a massive library of games and game styles, the C64 never actually received a port of Bomberman, or many clones for that matter. A late 1992 C64 game release called Bug Bomber by Kingsoft was probably the closest the system ever got to a Bomberman style game, at least during the system's 1982 to 1993 original period. But that all changed in 2013 when Bomberland 64 was released by RGCD. This game is obviously a well-crafted ode to Bomberman and not really the original, but some of the more later ones in the series, which added the elaborate multiplayer aspects and much more chaotic action. Gameplay is the same as I talked about earlier, with the biggest difference being the pace, and it being even more in the style of a faster-paced arcade game. It still has all the wacky power-ups like speed and bomb radius, and a multitude of massive, very cool boss battles as well. Being based on later Bomberman games means not only do you get an excellent 36-level single-player experience with its full own story, but you also get all those fun multiplayer death matches from the more chaotic titles like Saturn Bomberman. The death matches also support 2 to 5 players with the help of Protovision's 4-player adapter that works with your original C64. It's always very cool to see such well-implemented support for this peripheral. This game is excellent on all fronts, from its high-res detailed graphics, awesome pumping SID music, the excellent single and multiplayer options, and of course tight responsive controls. I think coder Mikkel Okawicki did a stellar job that was apparently 10 years in the making. This game is also free as a digital download from RGCD, and I'll leave a link to their site. It's also available in this excellent physical version on cartridge with a ton of extras. Currently, as of making this, it's sold out, but maybe some new stock will be produced. Overall, even if you're not a fan of Bomberman's multiplayer aspects, this version's single player experience is a great treat for anyone wanting a fun, easy to get into arcade romp. And thanks for joining me, Bastish B at 64K. I hope you had a good time. If you can like and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time. Cheers. Hey, Bastish B here for 64K, and welcome to another episode of New Retro. And if you've never watched New Retro before, basically I take a look at a new game released on an old system or a new updated version. We also go back and check out the inspiration game or the original game. Today we got 3. Okay, so let's first take a look at that arcade original. 1989 saw the release of Turbo Outrun by Sega in the arcades. This is a sequel to the original arcade game Outrun, which came out in 1986 and was designed by legend Yu Suzuki. Most of the same team from Sega's AM2 division worked on this arcade sequel, including Hiroshi Miyauchi, who composed the original Immortal soundtrack. And although this isn't quite as good as that, it still has some rocking Sega tunes to get you in the mood for tearing down those highways. In this version, you have to race across the USA, from New York to LA, and features 16 stages in total. Unlike the original, you cannot choose your path and there's only one to follow. but there are a bunch of extra features to make up for this. First, as the name suggests, your Ferrari is outfitted with a turbo booster to send the car into overdrive for brief periods of time. You can't use it all the time or else the car overheats, so you got to keep a reasonable balance between driving well and using it on those nice long straights or to boost start after a crash. Another cool aspect is that after every 4 stages you get to take a break and have a chance to choose an upgrade for your car, from a souped up engine, better gripping tires, or an enhanced turbo feature. And the last major addition is you racing against an opponent as well as the time clock. If he beats you to the last of the 4 checkpoints, your girlfriend would ditch you and join him for the next leg of the race. So much for true love. Is this game as good as the original? No, it's not. But that doesn't mean it's bad. It's still a very cool, fun, fast-paced arcade ride with good graphics, a cracking soundtrack, and tons of variety in its 16 stages to make it a game still well worth a go on MAME or the arcade original if you can still find one kicking about. And now onto the original C64 version. Turbo Outrun was released on the C64 by US Gold in 1989, the same year as the arcade release. The game was programmed by that talented team of Probe, who made some truly brilliant C64 games in its later years, like Special Criminal Investigations, Mr. Heli, and Smash TV. This game is how you do an arcade conversion correct. Not only does it feature all the arcade's new modes, plus all 16 stages, but it even enhances some aspects, like the soundtrack, for example, by Jerome Tell, which is absolutely phenomenal. And that remix of Magical Sound Shower on the loader screen is one of the C64's best SID tunes, hands down. Besides the soundtrack, the graphics are excellent in terms of menus, intermission screens, and the game itself. It simply pushes the C64 to the limit. There's just such a large variety of track with all the arcade details intact, including the storms and roadside obstacles. Zap 64 December 1989 issue sang its praises, giving the game an overall 97%, saying, "Perfectly presented with all the superb playability of the coin-op." Besides the C64 version, most other ports fared fairly badly, so do be aware of that if you plan on trying it on other systems. And now let's look at the new version by Access. And in 2020 we got this new C64 version of Turbo Outrun by Cracking Group Access. They were formed in 1991 in Germany, where most of the group originated, although it's now made up of many non-German members, who at this point have been cracking games and producing awesome C64 demos for decades. Now let's take a look at this new updated version of the classic C64 conversion. First up, it's an easy flash release, meaning this file can be used on everything from the Ultimate 1541, Ultimate 64, Turbo Chameleon, Vice, and of course the C64 Mini and Maxi. So you got all your modern C64 alternatives covered. John Egg also contributes a new excellent loader screen, and the game is now NTSC and PAL compatible, making it easy for anyone in any region to enjoy it. The original C64 version was a big old multi-loader of a game, which wasn't too bad on disc, but obviously the cassette version was a long slog to play. And with this being an easy flash release means the loading is almost non-existent, which is awesome. There have also been a number of bug fixes, most notably some slight graphical glitches, and the high score table will now save your high score, unlike in the original version. And lastly, what's one of these releases without a nice set of docks and trainers to help or cheat your way to the end of the game? This is a nice slick version of an almost arcade perfect port, just made that a little bit better, and is a fantastic version of the game to check out, especially if you've never played the C64 version before. And even if you have, it's still a great enhancement that's totally worth a download. So you're probably wondering, where can I get these games? As for the original arcade version, your best bet is to play it through MAME or on a RetroPie. You'll probably get the best experience from that. It was released on a bunch of home formats like the Mega Drive and the Amiga in the early 90s, but none of those versions are particularly that great. The original Turbo Outrun on the Commodore 64 is available physically on disc and tape. You can find it on eBay. And as for the new Access version, it's available on csdb.dk. If it's not there already, it will be very soon. And thanks for joining me, Bastish B at 64K. I hope you had a good time. If you can like and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated. I'll see you next time. Cheers. Hey, Bastish B here for 64K, and welcome to another episode of New Retro. And if you've never watched this show before, basically I look at a new retro game that has been released on an old system, and then we go back and check out the game that might have inspired it. And today's games are... Okay, so let's first take a look at the two inspiration games. Mikie was released in 1984 by Konami in the arcades. As an arcade division, Konami were on a high with many great hits in a row like Puyan, Time Pilot, Garrus, Hypersports, and I always felt Mikie got a bit lost in all those heavy hitters, despite it being a really cool but insanely difficult game. The premise is you play high schooler Mikie who's trying to put together a letter from his girlfriend. In order to do that, you need to run around your high school while avoiding the teachers, jocks, and everybody else, and collect all the hearts. Each heart makes a letter, and once a word is complete, you can escape the stage. There are 5 levels in total, from a classroom, locker room, cafeteria, dance studio, and a football field, all with their own enemies and authority figures to avoid. Gameplay is simple and addictive, with risk-reward tropes where you gotta keep trying to get those hearts no matter what, but also know when to back off and do some dodging. It's very fast-paced and quite difficult, and it was a real quarter-muncher back in the day. One of the most unique aspects of the game though is the soundtrack, which features 2 songs by the Beatles, which are A Hard Day's Night and Twist and Shout, even though that song was already a cover. I always thought these songs were unlicensed in the game, but they were actually licensed through Jazzrack, a copyright collection agency in Japan, to be used in the arcade version. Imagine what hoops you would have to jump through these days to make that sort of deal happen. What's interesting is that the game that was made exists only in its original form in Europe and the USA, because Konami got cold feet in Japan about it with its story of a delinquent high schooler getting up to mischief, and decided to change the whole setting to an office salaryman environment, with the game going under the name Shinyu Shain Torokun, which means Freshman Employee Toru, and was released exclusively in Japan by Sega. Mikie was released by Imagine in 1986 on the C64. Just like the arcade, for whatever reason, it is a pretty obscure C64 game to find as a standalone release. I think most people played this one in the Konami Coin-Op Hits pack, with myself included. The game itself is an excellent conversion to the C64 in every aspect. It's based on the US and European high school versions of the arcade, with only the dance studio level changed to a gym, which makes a lot more sense for a high school anyway. The gameplay is just as fast and frantic, with the game being a little easier, at least in my opinion, compared to the brutally hard arcade version. The graphics are fantastic on every level, and it captures the arcade perfectly, with really cool colors and animation, and it all comes in the form of a single loader game, which is very impressive. But the best part is the music by Sid legend Martin Galway, with not only some excellent original music, but his Sid interpretations of the Beatles songs are absolutely brilliant, making the arcade ones sound pretty pathetic in comparison. This is a great conversion by Imagine, and sits right up there in quality with their Green Beret and Hypersports jobs, and is without a doubt the inspiration for the next game we're about to look at. And now let's check out the new game. My Life was released by Cytronic Software in 2016 on the C64. This game was made by the team of Trevor Story on graphics, Akim Volkers on coding, and Soul Cross on music. And if that team sounds familiar, they also made The Darkness, Age of Heroes, and tons of other fantastic C64 games that have come out over the last few years. The story for the game is you play Eugene, and he lives a pretty mundane life. Your goal is to survive 1 week in his miserable life and make it to the weekend. Each day has you trying to get to work, with each day progressively getting harder and harder. The gameplay is exactly the same as Mikie, with you needing to stamp on letters and make up words or phrases to escape each level, while avoiding all manner of death like weird vacuum cleaners and mailmen and all other mental things trying to kill you. The game features some really great high-res graphics that look extremely good, and the music is also pretty stomping and catchy, although not as memorable as Mikie's, but they did have the Beatles advantage, so take that with a grain of salt. I had a ton of fun messing around with this game. It's just a cool, fun arcade style romp that you can slap on for 10 minutes or so at a time, between breaks from that latest epic 60-hour RPG that you're attempting to finish by the weekend. And you're probably wondering, Where can I get these games from?
As for the original arcade version, I'm not aware of it being re-released on any other systems beside the original 8-bit run, so your best bet is MAME to check it out. The original Commodore 64 version was available in a physical form. Like I said earlier, it's available individually, it's very expensive and hard to find, so the cheaper alternative on the Commodore is to find the Konami Coin-Op Hits pack and play it through there if you want a physical version of it. And as for my life, it's available at Cytronic Software. You can download it, it's available in digital form, so you can play it on your C64 Mini and Maxi, and also of note, it's available in NTSC and PAL formats.
And thanks for joining me, Bastish B, at 64K. I hope you had a good time. If you can like and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated. I'll see you next time. Cheers. Hey, Bastish B here for 64K, and welcome to another episode of New Retro. So if you've never watched this show before, the premise is I take a look at a new game on an old retro system, and then we have a look at the inspiration game, the game that might have inspired it. And today's games are... So let's first check out the original.
Scramble was released by Konami in the arcades in 1981. Like most early Konami games, it was distributed by different companies worldwide, like LaJack in Japan and Stern in North America. The game was a side-scrolling shooter, in a sense, although you weren't only just shooting and dodging stuff, but bombing specific fuel towers to keep your ship going, as it's endlessly running down on gas. The game is made up of 6 sections that change as you cross a certain line. There's no real stopping, it just keeps going like an endless runner until the last section where you have to take out the enemy base, and then the game goes into a loop. I used to love finding this one in the arcades. Even though I was playing it much later, around 1984-85, it was still such a blast, and what was really cool about it was that it wasn't too difficult, so 1 credit equaled a lot of gameplay, which is something that didn't really go together with arcades. The game was a major hit at the time, with 15,000 cabinets being sold in the US alone in its first 5 months of release. Strangely enough though, despite its popularity, it was only ported to 1 system officially, which was the Vectrex, but that didn't stop the clones of it popping up on many systems during the early 80s. So we're going to jump over to the Commodore 64 now, seeing as today's new game is on this system, and check out its original answer to Scramble. Like I previously said, only 1 official port exists originally, and what that meant is it just brought out the clones to come out on every popular system at the time. The C64 was no exception, with its handful of rip-offs coming out in the early years. For me though, the one that stands out is Scramble with a K by Antiriad, which was released in 1983. Antiriad were a British software company that published C64 titles from about 1983 to 85, before their eventual demise and morphing into another 8-bit company, Anco. Antiriad were the kings of clone games, and if you're unfamiliar with that term, it basically means they blatantly copied popular games of the time, usually arcade games, without getting the proper licenses, and turned a quick buck with their rip-offs. Most early 8-bit companies though were all guilty of this. Just check out my documentaries on Datasoft and Synapse Software for the many examples. But with Antiriad, these guys were the kings, with blatant rip-offs of Robotron, Frogger, Qbert, Donkey Kong, Moon Patrol, and of course Scramble, and that's only naming a few of them. Their version was originally released on the VIC-20 and ported to the C64, and is a pretty good facsimile of the arcade. So much so that when I was a kid I actually thought this was the official arcade port of the game. So despite them changing the ship's look, everything else is intact and follows the arcade almost beat for beat. It plays a little slower and the scrolling isn't as smooth, probably due to the VIC-20 port, but besides that it's just as much fun, and considering it was released in 1983, the graphics are really well done, and it definitely stands out for me at least as the C64's best clone of the game. Well, until our next title, that is.
And now let's check out the new game.
And in 2015 we got a new version of Scramble released on the Commodore 64 by Thomas Cart, called Scramble version 1.4. Wow. This is the first thing I said when booting this thing up for the first time. I know the arcade is pretty simplistic in retrospect, but to see such an accurate version of the arcade game on the C64 is just such a pleasure. The attention to detail is brilliant, from the recreation of the menus to the sprites looking exactly like the arcade game. Even the sound is replicated almost to a T. It's crazy good. It also plays really smoothly and is much faster and more responsive than the analog clone. I'm not really sure his reasoning for changing the fuel to oil and your ship therefore having an oil gauge. It doesn't really make too much sense to me to make this small change. If you're planning to sell this, I would understand, but it's a free fan-made game, so why change that? If anybody has a logical idea about this, please leave a comment. Despite this though, it's an almost perfect arcade port that feels, looks and sounds almost exactly like the arcade, and is a highly recommend play on your Commodore 64.
So you're probably wondering, where do I find these games?
So as for the original arcade version, check out the Konami Anniversary Collection Arcade Classics. It's available on all modern systems. The analog version is available on eBay as a physical copy. It might be a little bit hard to find these days and might be a bit pricey. And as for the new version, it's available on csdb.dk. It's a fan-made game, so therefore it's a free download.
And thanks for joining me, Bastish B at 64K. If you can like and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time. Cheers! Hey, Bastish B here for 64K, and welcome to another episode of New Retro. So if you've never seen this show before, I take a look at a newly released game on an old classic system, and then we have a look at the game that might have inspired it, the inspiration game. And today's games are So let's first check out the original.
Master of Magic was released in 1985 by Mastertronic on their Mad label. In this fantasy RPG action hybrid, you have to embark on a subterranean adventure to retrieve an amulet that will grant your master immortality. The game was designed and programmed by Richard Darling, one half of the Darling brothers, who founded and built the juggernaut software company Codemasters. The game is seen from a top-down view and can be considered one big massive dungeon crawler. As you go through the labyrinth, you'll find many items to help you in your quest: armor for protection, magic rings, potions for healing, and all your magic spells at your disposal. Bucking the trend of most RPG style games at the time, Magic was really fast paced with its turn-based battles that could be over within seconds, and also the brisk paced overhead sections felt a bit more like Gauntlet than Ultima. It wasn't your usual RPG, and felt a little bit like the new wave of action RPGs coming out of Japan on the Famicom at the time, but I think it came more down to the market, especially the C64 market in Europe was completely different to the US, with European gamers at that time at least more into arcade action style game, and the US dominated by strategies and RPGs. I think that's why Magic is a bit of a hybrid. There was enough action not to scare away the European market, but enough depth to keep you coming back for more. It's a bit like Temple of Apshai, but just way faster, easier to control with just a joystick for everything. One of the standouts for me though is the absolutely epic soundtrack from Rob Hubbard, which is just brilliant and makes this game way better for it. And considering it was released as a budget game, makes it even more impressive. Zap 64 issue number 12 gave the game a whopping 88% overall. With its fast-paced turn-based combat and overall ease to get into, you can see why so many people still love this game. My advice if you're playing it for the first time, find a weapon quickly, or else this will be the shortest RPG you ever play.
And now let's check out the new game.
The Lord of Dragonspire was released in December 2019 by Icon on the C64 as part of the Zap 64 2020 annual stretch goal collaboration. It received a general physical and digital release though in the first quarter of 2020 to the masses. Much like Master of Magic, Dragonspire is soaking in high fantasy tropes, with the basics of the story involving you needing to get to the Dragonspire Tower and fight your way up to the top and kill the Demon Lord who's taken up residence and is using the tower's dark magic to bring back all the nasty creatures of old. As you can no doubt see, Dragonspire wears its inspiration proud, with the game mimicking the look, feel, and style of said classic to a T. The play area though is much larger, giving you a bit less of a claustrophobic feel as Magic, but besides that they are extremely similar. The game has all the exploration elements that make this style of game so addictive, which is what's around that next corner, and do I risk searching it even though I've got no more food left? It's that kind of feel which makes it so enjoyable. As you can also see, creatures are visible on screen, so you can avoid combat if you like, just like Master of Magic. The one big difference in these games is the difficulty, with Dragonspire being pretty tough initially, until you level up a bit. You can down almost any encounter, and healing food is pretty scarce, so getting into the game does require skill, but also a large dose of luck, especially in the early beginnings. Besides this grup though, it's well made with some nice graphics and a truly epic Sid soundtrack that's more than 10 minutes long by the great Jason Page. That is a fitting fantasy tribute to Hubbard's classic. We also got Stuart Collier on coding duties, as well as Trevor Story on game design and art. These guys have all been involved in one way or another with some of the best software released on the C64 over the last 10 years. Also, as with a bunch of Icon's recent releases, you also get a cool music demo as well. That's a fun way to listen to the soundtrack uninterrupted. Like I mentioned earlier, the game is available in digital and physical form from Cytronic Software on the C64, and I'll leave a link in the description to the game. Overall, it's really enjoyable, which, like Master, combines light RPG elements and turn-based action into a satisfying fantasy exploration game that's definitely worth your time.
And thanks for joining me, Bastish B, at 64K. If you can like and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time. Cheers. Hey, Bastish B here for 64K, and welcome to another episode of New Retro. And if you've never watched this show before, I take a look at a new game on an old system, and then we take a look at the original version, or the game that might have inspired this new version. And today's games are... So let's first take a look at the original arcade version.
Joust was released in 1982 in the arcades by Williams. The game had a bizarrely unique setting that set it apart from all the other space shooters that had invaded the arcades at that time. Game designer John Newcomer came up with a strange idea because he didn't want to put out just another generic shooter, as he felt the arcades were just overrun with them at the time. I mean, even Williams themselves had a massive hit with Defender. The game was a 1 or 2 player romp where you have these knights that ride on buzzards, and you fly around on an ostrich and try to take them out. The jousting aspect is just like traditional jousting, except the winner is determined by who hits the highest, or you can just simply jump on their heads to defeat them. When defeated, the knights turn into eggs, which you can collect for bonus points, but more importantly, collecting them means they won't rehatch back into more aggressive knights, and therefore you have to defeat them once again. Just like most arcades, you are also forced to complete waves of bad guys as quickly as possible, or the dreaded pterodactyl will attack. Going too close to the lava also at the bottom of the screen can also mean certain death, as a deadly hand will try to grab you and pull you down. The game is all about seeing how long you can last or how many waves you can survive, with each one increasing in speed and amount of knights and obstacles that are thrown at you. It's classic early 80s arcade gaming. I was absolutely terrible at this game in the arcades as a kid. I never fully knew how to play it properly. It was only much later through video game compilations that I got to play this again and actually figure out how to play it properly and learn to enjoy it. There was also an arcade sequel in 1986 which was more of the same, but if you enjoyed the original version, then this is well worth a play as well. For an easy modern way to play this classic, you can also check out the Midway Arcade Origins collection on Xbox 360 and PS3.
And now let's look at the new retro version.
In 2020, we finally got to see the release of Joust on the Commodore 64, although not officially. The story goes the game was made and completed and was going to be released on the C64 in 1984 by Atari Soft. But everyone knows the video game crash hit and Atari was hit hard, hence the game never saw the light of day. But now over 35 years later you can finally play it thanks to Ken van Mersbergen, who in the first quarter of 2020 was busy converting some old discs of a retired programmer and discovered the Joust file on there, as well as the source code for the C64 version of Popeye, which was also an arcade conversion, which leads many people to believe that whoever did the Joust conversion may have worked on Popeye as well, although nobody has been able to confirm who did the actual work. With Joust's absence in the 80s, the C64 was graced with its fair share of clones to compensate, or cash in on. One that springs to mind that is quite enjoyable is called Pegasus and is totally well worth checking out. But now you can actually try the real deal out for yourself. The conversion itself is very faithful to the arcade. Simple graphics, basic sound effects, just like its big brother, and it replicates it really well. Gameplay is also very close, as I was able to use the same techniques from the arcade version to plow through waves of nuts, and the creepy lava hand and the pterodactyl are all there as well. And I found that playing it in its hardest difficulty was way more fun and really makes the game shine. Overall, it's pretty good. It would have been cool though to have a rocking Sid tune playing during gameplay or even on the title screen, but then again it probably wouldn't make it the arcade. In retrospect, this would have been another great arcade conversion under Atari Soft's belt, much like Jungle Hunt or Moon Patrol, but at least we finally got to play it. The game is currently available to download for free from csdb.dk, and I'll leave a link in the description to it, so there's no reason not to try out this long lost gem.
And thanks for joining me, Bastish B at 64K. I hope you had a good time. If you can like and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time. Cheers. Hey, Bastish B here for 64K, and welcome to another episode of New Retro.
Welcome to 64K, hosted by Bastish B.
And welcome back. So if you've never watched an episode of New Retro before, basically I look at a new game on an old system, but then we also jump back and check out the inspiration game, or the original, the game that might have inspired this new version. And today's games are So let's first check out that inspiration game.
So let's first take a look at Lunar Lander, released in 1979 by Atari in the arcades. It wasn't the original or first game in the gravity landing genre of games, for lack of a better term, but it was definitely one of the most popular. The game's premise is simple. Land your spacecraft on any of the landing pads without crashing or running out of fuel. It's simple yet highly addictive. Just like a lot of early arcades, it had its own unique control setup with that big chunky lever which made it catch your eye immediately when you entered an arcade. The game runs on a custom vector graphics engine that Atari made specifically for the game, which allowed it in real time to cut to a zoomed in shot as you get closer to your destination, which was revolutionary for the time. Unlike 99% of arcade games though, it doesn't have a timer, forcing you to go quick and make big mistakes, and it's all just based on how much fuel you have in your ship. Run out and you plummet to your death, unless you cheekily slap in another quarter to buy more fuel. Yes, Atari invented the microtransaction. Well, sort of. A few decades later, that cheeky Double Dragon 3 used those same mechanics, but people were so offended by using real money to buy items in the shop in the game that it was dropped from certain arcade versions. Electronic Arts obviously didn't get that message. The game sold almost 5,000 arcade units, which was quite successful for the time, but Atari's other arcade game that year, which used the Lunar Lander engine, Asteroids, became the runaway hit, and ended up kind of eclipsing a bit of Lunar Lander's legacy. If you want to try out the game on modern systems, check out the Atari Flashback Classics Volume 1 on the PS4 and Xbox One. And before we check out today's new game, let's take a brief look at the C64's most memorable early take on the gravity genre, which was called Jupiter Lander, released in 1982 on the C64 and VIC-20, released by Commodore themselves and programmed by HAL Laboratory. This, like most early C64 games, was what you would call a clone game. Basically copying an arcade game, slightly changing the name to cash in on its success and receive easy money for minimal effort. Check out the C64 games publisher Analog for more examples. The game, however, is still pretty good and challenging to play. Try to land on any of the pads, each one being slightly more perilous than the other, and don't run out of fuel. If you land successfully, you get refueled for the next attempt. This, like the next game we're going to look at, is ultimately, in my opinion, better played with a keyboard than a joystick. The precision is way more accurate, and the game is all about that, so make sure you try out that option first. Overall, it was one of those early Commodore games that I played the heck out of, and it's fun even though it's pretty limited in scope, but still delivers a pretty unique gameplay experience.
And now let's check out the new retro game.
In late 2020, we got Lunar Lander Elite on the Commodore 64 by C64 Mark. This is essentially another clone game, but it goes way more than that, by taking the basic gameplay and adding lots of fun addictiveness to the overall experience. Number one is definitely music. I love a game with a good thumping soundtrack. A C64 game especially just feels kind of weird without one, and this game has some rocking tracks. All the basic tropes are in place though. Choose where to land out of 3 options. If successful, however, you move on to the next level with 40 uniquely designed stages in total to try out and beat. I really like all the fun little additions like the laser guns, massive moving doors, those dodgy EMP traps, and various others that make this much more challenging than the previous games. The stages themselves are also designed extremely well and are not merely randomly generated like the original Lunar Lander. Difficulty settings are also available if you find it a bit hard, and the Cracking Group Access has a nice train version if you're really bad at it. The best part though is that the game is free or pay what you want, so why not give them a couple of bucks for this cool little game. It is, however, only PAL compatible in case you're thinking of playing it on original hardware, so just bear that in mind. The excellent graphics, the really nice variety to the stages, optional music or sound effects in-game, great controls, which again I'd highly recommend keyboard over controller for this game for the best experience, and this all amounts to another excellent clone game which goes beyond the original and is one of the most fun recent C64 games I've played. Check it out.
And you're probably wondering, where can I get these games?
As for the original Lunar Lander arcade, like I said earlier, check out the Atari Flashback Classics Volume 1 on Xbox One and PS4. As for Jupiter Lander, your best bet is getting a copy off eBay in its original physical form. And as for Neptune Lander Elite, I'll leave a link in the description. You can pay what you want or download it for free.
And thanks for joining me, Bastish B at 64K. I hope you had a good time. If you can like and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated. And I'll see you next time. Cheers. Hey, Bastish B out for 64K, and welcome to another episode of New Retro.
Welcome to 64K. Hosted by Bastish B.
And welcome back. So if you've never watched New Retro before, I take a look at a new game on an old system, and then we go back and check out the game that might have inspired it, the inspiration game. And today's games are... And now let's check out that inspiration game.
Boot Hill was released in 1977 in the arcades by Midway, and it's a sequel to 1975's Western Gun or Gunfight, which was originally made by Taito. Boot Hill was the first of these sort of Western showdown games that I ever played in the arcade. I remember playing it and then jumping onto Atari's Asteroid machine, which was right next to it. Damn, I love those 1970s and 80s arcades. Boot Hill is simple. It's either a 1 or 2 player versus game where you as cowboys have to shoot it out showdown style against each other. Try to blast your opponent as he dodges behind cactuses and wagons. You got 6 bullets, so make them count. Little flourishes like cactuses you hide behind disintegrating after every bullet hit, Space Invaders style, and the random wagon that bursts through the middle of the screen is a good distraction or makes for great cover as well. I remember playing this against my dad and having an absolute blast, and this is a major theme with this subgenre, is the 2-player option, and without it things get boring pretty quick. quick. The computer is a real fiend in this game and manages to pull off some real trick shots like he's Buffalo Bill on crack. The graphics are simplistic 1970s style and the sound is almost non-existent with basic gun and a funky little death tune when you bite the bullet. Despite all this, it's still kind of fun to play. Basic to the core, but fun nevertheless, and a whole world of clones was spawned out of this game and its predecessor, such as The Duel on the Commodore 64, and my favorite home version, Outlaw by Atari. Overall, it's an interesting curiosity to check out, and is no doubt one of the games that inspired our next one.
And now let's check out that new game.
Showdown was released in late 2020 by Badger Punch Games on the Commodore 64. It's a new take on the classic Showdown genre of games that started in the arcades in the 1970s. The game is a 1 or 2 player versus affair just like Boot Hill or Outlaw, where you gun it out against your opponent, real or computer, with the first to 5 wins taking the game. When you first load it up, you're greeted with a fantastic little SID tune, which thumps away and boosts the atmosphere of the game tremendously. Just like Boot Hill, you can hide behind debris. Use the wagon as cover, but watch out for those boxes of TNT. They can either aid you by blowing up your foe, or be your ultimate undoing. The bullets can be curved slightly just like Boot Hill, and you'll want to make sure you reload before jumping out for your kill shot. Again, this is a fun little distraction for a few minutes, and nothing more in single player. But in 2-player versus, it's an absolute blast to play. So if this is how you're gonna play it, then download this right now. The graphics are very nice and detailed, with great animation, and the music is really cool as well. My only gripe is that I wish there was just some variety in the stages. Why not throw in some classic western themes like the town square showdown, the abandoned gold mine, or a shootout in an old graveyard? All fun locales that would have made the single player at least more interesting. I like this game, it's simple and fun, but would only recommend it if you plan on playing it in 2-player mode. Single player is just a little bit too basic. If it had a few more options, that would have been really cool, but seeing as it's only $1, it's kinda worth buying anyway and supporting the C64 programming community at the same time. It's both PAL and NTSC compatible and works on original and C64 Maxi and Mini. So why not check it out?
And you're probably wondering, where can I get these games?
As far as I'm aware, the arcade game Boot Hill was never re-released in any sort of way, shape or form, so your best bet is probably playing it through MAME or a RetroPie image. As for Showdown, it's available in digital form, and I'll leave a link in the description so you can download it, and it's also going to be available in a physical cassette version from Bitmapsoft in the near future.
And thanks for joining me, Bastish B, at 64K. I hope you had a good time. If you can like and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time. Cheers. Hey, Bastish B here for 64K, and welcome to another episode of New Retro.
Welcome to 64K. Hosted by Bastish B.
And welcome back. So if you've never watched New Retro before, I basically look at a new retro game on an old system, and then we look at the game that might have inspired it, the inspiration game. And today's games are... So let's first have a look at the inspiration game.
Hawkeye was released in 1988 and published by Thalamus. It was a side-scrolling action platform game where you, as the main character Hawkeye, had to blast certain creatures to collect pieces of a puzzle. 4 pieces were needed to escape a level, and there were 12 massive stages in total. The game was designed by the Dutch demo scene group The Boys Without Brains, who were active from 1986 and did many demos on the C64 before they released their first and only game, Hawkeye. They unfortunately disbanded after the game was complete, but in 1989 2 of the members, Mario Van Zeist and Arthur Van Joel, formed Euphoria, who focused on the Amiga as their platform of choice. Ever wondered why System 3's Limbo's Quest is basically a cute-em-up version of Hawkeye? Well, they made it, that's why. as well as the excellent Amiga shoot-'em-up, Disposable Hero. Hawkeye itself is as simple as it gets. Keep checking the top corners of the screen for the sparkling eye which indicates which direction a creature is that has one of the puzzle pieces. Find it and blast the hell out of it. There are 4 weapons at your disposal, from the unlimited handgun, which is obviously the weakest, a rapid-fire machine gun, laser rifle, and the excellent hardcore rocket launcher for those tough boss characters. The game is fast-paced and doesn't let up for a second. Not only are you blasting, but there's also light platforming sections to help navigate around the levels. This game has a lot to like. I really loved loading it up and being able to manipulate the music as the game loaded, which was a common thread with Thalamus released games. The intro itself was phenomenal, and you could tell the boys used their excellent demo scene skills to set the stage for the game in epic glory. The music is absolutely rocking, and it's no secret I'm a big Jerome Tell fan, and he delivers an exceptional score with Charles Denham, both of the group Maniacs of Noise, responsible for countless classic C64 music tracks. The graphics are excellent, smooth, colorful, and employing great use of parallax scrolling and every other trick in the demo scene book. I played my bootleg of this thousands of times as a kid in the 80s, always getting a little bit further despite the game's difficulty, which ramps up quite a bit from level to level. Zap64 in issue number 40 gave the game an overall 96%, which admittedly is a bit overboard. It's great, but maybe not 96% great. They did, however, say an addictive and beautiful presented shoot-'em-up of the highest caliber, and that really can't be denied.
And now let's have a look at today's new game.
Outrage was released at the tail end of 2020 on the C64 by Protovision and Cytronic Software. As you can see here, this game was clearly inspired by Hawkeye. The game originally started its development cycle in 1990, but in 1993, however, 64 magazine held a competition for the best homebrew C64 game, with the winner getting the game actually physically published. Outrage ended up winning, but by this point the distributor had gotten out of C64 publishing. Many years later, in 2005, Protovision stepped up to try and finish the game for publication, but it fell apart. Cytronic then took a shot at it in 2010, but it floundered as well. But finally, with the combined efforts of both companies, the game has finally seen the light of day. As you can see, the game now sports this excellent Steve Day loader screen that captures the action so well. The game comprises of 5 levels with bosses for each. However, seeing it all the way through is gonna be a real challenge because the difficulty is damn hard. Gameplay wise, it's simply a side-scrolling run and gun affair. Blast everything you see, including creatures and traps, and keep on moving till the end where you'll face off against a boss character. There are also tons of shops that pop up during the level, which you can use your cash which you picked up from dead beasties, where you can buy ammo for your guns, health, and smart bombs. Weapons wise, you have 4 guns straight off the bat, each one more powerful than the last. Your main gun has unlimited ammo, but the rest are all limited though, and ammo needs to be bought in shops, but they are really powerful and take out most creatures with one shot. You also have some screen killing smart bombs, although I would suggest using them only on the main bosses because those guys are real bastards to beat. This game may look like Hawkeye, but it plays quite differently in most respects. There's a lot of cheap trial and error deaths, crazy hard bosses, and some jumping platform action that results in, yeah, you guessed it, even more deaths. I'm not a huge fan of the fact that your health is constantly draining no matter what, even if you're not getting hit. It's kind of a cheap way of just making you try to rush a level. Having said all that, overall it is a pretty well put together game. It has nice graphics and it has some pretty good tunes, but it is very tough and unforgiving, just like games were when this was originally designed. So if you're not up for the challenge, you may not fare too well here, but for everyone else it's a pretty good, although slightly annoying, run and gun challenge.
So you're probably wondering, where can I get this game?
As for Hawkeye, it's still only available in its original 80s physical form, so you'll have to check out eBay if you want that, or you can do a quick little search on the internet to get a digital version for your C64 Mini or Maxi or VAS. And as for Outrage, you can check out Protovision. I'll leave links in the description. You can get a digital version of the game, as well as this really cool boxed edition that comes with a whole lot of other goodies. The digital edition also comes with these cool documents that you can read. It's got the full making of the game. I just basically highlighted it. You can read it in real detail of the process of how this game got made from start to finish. It's a pretty good read.
And thanks for joining me, Bastish B at 64K. I hope you had a good time. If you can like and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated. I'll see you next time. Cheers. Hey, Bastish B here for 64K and welcome to another episode of New Retro. And if you've never watched this show before, basically I look at a new retro game on an old system, and then we look at the game that might have inspired it, the inspiration game. And today's games are... So let's first take a look at today's inspiration game.
Montezuma's Revenge was released in 1984 on the Commodore 64 by the Parker Brothers. It was a flip-screen platform adventure game with you controlling the character Panama Joe as he searches some ancient Aztec temple and looting all the jewels and gold within. What a classy guy. This was one of those very early C64 games that I played in the first wave of Commodore titles on my friend's machine before I got my own. We spent a lot of time playing it and trying to figure out the rooms and the best ways not to die. The game can essentially be seen as an early example of a Metroidvania style title with the temple littered with all sorts of traps, you needing keys and other items to open new areas, and a lot of backtracking and searching to make your way down the 9 massive floors with roughly about 99 different rooms to explore. Having essentially the freedom to go in any direction and path you want, until obviously reaching a locked door that is, was so super cool back then. With most games just pushing you in the left to right direction, Montezuma's made you feel like you were actually exploring an ancient temple with each screen offering a new set of challenges. You could only carry a certain amount of items at any one time, so therefore a degree of strategy was involved with figuring out what you needed to progress further down the temple. Items include the now classic video game trope of different colored keys for certain colored doors, an amulet of immunity, a disposable one-hit sword, and so much more. The game got pretty favorable reviews across the board and was released on all major 8-bit systems of the time, with Zap64 giving it an 83% overall in issue number 12. Overall, it's still a very playable and fun platform adventure game that only really lacks a nice C64 soundtrack, as the game only has a few quick medleys and the odd sound effect. Maybe a cracking group could give it a cool new loader and title screen and a rocking C64 soundtrack. Now wouldn't that be cool?
And now let's have a look at the new game.
Sydney Hunter and the Sacred Tribe was released in 2018 on the Commodore 64 by Collectavision Games. The Sydney Hunter series has been around since about 2012, with various other retro versions being available before this C64 port. The game follows very closely in Montezuma Revenge's shoes, as it's an open-world platform adventure game where you play Sydney Hunter, an adventurer exploring the Yucatan Peninsula after treasure, but gets caught by a local tribe and becomes their prisoner. Help them find their mystical portal and then you'll gain your freedom. As you can see, gameplay is very much in Montezuma's mold, where looting for treasure is used to give to the tribesmen to gain access to new areas. The temple is filled with traps and creatures that are intent with sending you to the grave, which actually leads to one of the game's coolest moments, as in the afterlife you meet Panama Joe, and he ushers you back to the land of the living, which is one of the best throwback cameos I've ever seen in a game. One of the most obvious drawbacks of the original version of Montezuma's was the lack of a map feature, which is included in Sydney and makes exploring the 100-screen maze much easier to comprehend. There's all manner of traps, from spark pits, lava, quicksand, bats, snakes, etc. Although as a game, Sydney is much easier and more forgiving to play, with your character having nice big jumps that don't require painful pinpoint accuracy. I really also love the graphic style, as it employs the C64's underused high-res mode for really sharp and defined graphics and animation. The music is provided by Icon 64's regular Sid Master, Soul Cross, and is very reminiscent of his later tunes for them, and is good without being overbearing. This is another one of those games that I stumbled across in about 2018 and literally reignited my love for the C64 once again, and inevitably spawned this channel. So what more can I really say about this, other than it's a C64 game well worth tracking down to play.
And you're probably wondering, where can I get these games?
As per Montezuma's Revenge, eBay is your best bet for a physical copy. Unfortunately, it's gonna cost you dearly, but if you just want to get a digital version for your Maxi or Mini, just hit up csdb.dk and download it there. As for Sydney Hunter, check out Collectavision Games. It's available in both disc, cartridge, and digital forms. Although good luck on getting the physical versions, as they're usually out of stock. I'll leave links to everything in the video description.
And thanks for joining me, Bastish B, at 64K. I hope you had a good time. If you can like and subscribe, they'll be greatly appreciated, and I'll see you next time. Cheers. Hey, Bastish B here for 64K, and welcome to another episode of New Retro.
Welcome to 64K. Hosted by Bastish B.
And welcome back. So if you've never watched this show before, I take a look at a new game released on a retro system, and then we look at the inspiration game, the game that might have inspired it. And today's games are... So let's first take a look at that inspiration game.
Arcade Classics was released in 1987 by Firebird on the Commodore 64. This game was part of their £1.99 budget range, and considering you were basically getting 4 games, it was a deal well worth getting. Like the name suggests, it's a collection of clone unofficial arcade games for your C64. The main title screen lets you choose 1 of 4 games, each one a clear clone of a then retro arcade game. The 4 games in question are Invaders, Asteroids, Snakes, and Space Wars. They were all variations on arcades that were popular in the late 70s to early 80s, thus very easy to replicate on the C64 by 1987. Invaders was extremely cool. It's pretty much Space Invaders replicated right down to the green screen, which really adds that retro vibe, and is probably one of the most fun games on this list. Asteroids is also a pretty good rip-off of Atari's Asteroids arcade game, complete with a vector graphics type look, and is probably my favorite game on this next to Invaders. I played those two in the arcades endlessly. Asteroids in particular had a really addictive vibe, and the last two were 2-player games only, as they were both head-to-head styled. Snakes is a variation on the old Nibbler arcade from 1982. Going against a friend is obviously a ton of fun. It's simple eat or be eaten gameplay, and it works really well in a versus style, and I played this a lot back in the day. And the last was Space Wars, a variation on the old 1977 arcade game of the same name. It's basically a one-on-one versus fighting game set in space with spaceships where you have to just blast your friend or opponent. The planet in the middle is also pulsating with a gravitational pulse throwing everything into chaos. It's a decent game in 2-player, but it honestly gets old real quick, and is definitely my least favorite of this collection. If you have to put your mind back and consider the price of this and the fact that it was a single load game, and on top of that they managed to get the almighty Rob Hubbard to do the soundtrack, which is well worth the price of admission alone. It's a brilliant, loud rock guitar anthem very similar to his Skate or Die soundtrack. This is a really fun little collection to play back in the day, and it's still quite good now, and is definitely at least part of the influence for our next game.
And now on to the new game.
Arcade Days was released in the first quarter of 2021 through Cytronic Software, with programming duties by the Icon 64 team of Trevor Story, Stuart Collier, and Sol Cross. This game was made in conjunction with the Zap 64 2021 annual, just like the previous 2 years, which saw the team doing Sizzler and Lords of Dragonspire for the previous annuals. Please check out my video on the new Zap 64 annual for more details, which also has a making of Arcade Days feature to check out as well. The game is essentially an old arcade simulator, giving you the chance to play 18 different clone arcades based on popular games from the glory days of gaming. It is essentially 2 games though, the straight up arcade segment and the fact that you need to collect coins and exchange them for tokens, all the while avoiding the local arcade town bully, Kelly, and her cat. She drops coins which you can exchange to play games. 10 coins are needed for a token, although most coins count as multiple, so you only need to collect a few to play a game. The overall goal in this mode is to dethrone Kelly by completing every game, and thus becoming the king of your local arcade. If you've ever played the C64 game Lazy Jones, it's also quite similar to that in play and style, and the music definitely has overtones of that game. The arcade games themselves are quick, addictive fun, and you'll know immediately what games they were cloning if you spent any time in an Eddie's arcade or have played any Atari 2600 games. You've got variations on Space Invaders, Tanks, Pac-Man, Centipede, Lunar Lander, Frogger, and variations on those variations, which all gets very Inception-y. Every time you complete a game, it's marked off in the arcade so you know how many more you've got to go to complete the game. There are also 3 modes of play. Kiddie and Master are basically medium and hard modes, with the third, Practice, which is there if you just want to jump in and play the games, free play style, without bothering with collecting tokens or avoiding Kelly and her cat. You do have lives in regular play, and one touch from Kelly and you'll lose one. Her cat can only stun you. Too many hits and it's game over. Overall, it's a fun experience. It's simple and addictive, and will definitely leave a big smile on your face with all those fun arcade nostalgia trips in every little game. The graphics are a nice combination of traditional C64 sprite work and high-res style graphics, similar to most Icon 64 games. And the main tune by Soul Cross, like I said earlier, invokes the best of David Whittaker's Lazy Jones theme and the drone of that Space Invader sound effect tune. It's great. Check this one out on your C64. It's a real blast from the past.
So you're probably wondering, where can I get this game?
As of making this video, Arcade Days is not available yet, but will be soon in both physical disc and tape variants, as well as digital for your Mini, Maxi, and Vice. Everybody that added this game as a bonus to the annual Kickstarter probably has the game already or will have it soon. Also check out Lazy Jones and Arcade Classics on your C64 for variations on this game, and I'll leave a link in the video description to all the games for you to try out.
And thanks for joining me, Bastish B at 64K. I hope you had a good time. If you can like and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated. I'll see you next time. Cheers. Hey, Bastish B here for 64K, and welcome to another episode of New Retro. And if you've never watched this show before, I take a look at a new retro game on an old system, and then we also have a look at the inspiration game, the game that might have inspired it. And today's games are Okay, so let's first take a look at the inspiration game, the game that might have inspired our new one.
The Sacred Armor of Antiriad was released in 1986 on the Commodore 64 by Palace Software, best known for the Cauldron and Barbarian games. The game was a mixture of a few different styles: platform, puzzle, action, and adventure all rolled into one. You played a character Tal, who has to find and use the legendary anti-radiation suit, which was built before the Earth was nuked, but now you need it to stop a full-on alien invasion on Earth. The original version of the game came packed with a wonderful comic book, giving the full story in extreme detail, and was done by artist and writer of the game Dan Malone. The game starts off with you in caveman mode, with only a rock to throw as defense, and the bottom of the screen is the inventory bar, which is totally blacked out. Once you find the suit and power it up, the bar comes to life and is fully active, which is an extremely cool touch that I've never seen in any other game. The game itself is a flip screen affair where you have to explore and find all the upgrades for the suit, such as a jetpack and laser weapons, etc, etc. You can also jump in and out of the suit, and it can never be destroyed, but if it takes too many hits it'll run out of power and you'll have to exit it and go find a recharger before you can use it again. The game is fairly big when you initially start it, with over 100 rooms or screens to explore, but once you start figuring out where everything is, the game can be completed fairly quickly. That doesn't mean it's not a challenge. It's pretty difficult, especially initially, but it eases up once you get a few upgrades. The game's lead programmer Stan Skembry worked on a string of impressive Commodore 64 games like Barbarian, Vendetta, and The Last Ninja 3, with resident Palace Software composer Richard Joseph giving us a beautiful film-like score that nails the exploration and adventure vibe of this game to a T. It sports a wonderful, unique graphic style and on-point controls and an excellent map to explore, giving it an extremely addictive quality that makes you want to see everything. The game also goes under the name Rad Warrior in the US, rad meaning radiation and not the dude variety, and was published by Epix. This game also came out at the exact same time as Nintendo's Metroid and shares a lot in common with it. Or is it the other way around? Could the genre have been called Antiriadvania? Just don't tell those Nintendo fanboys that. They'll literally lose their mind. We'll just keep it between us C64 users.
And now let's check out the brand new release,
Soulless 2: The Armor of Gods was released in August 2021 on the Commodore 64 by Cytronic Software. It is a sequel to Soulless, originally released in 2012, and that game also recently received a special edition version, which is totally worth checking out. Soulless 2 picks up story-wise as you, King Ryzak, sets out to find the legendary Armor of the Gods, which gives you the ability to fly and use the Weapon of the Sun. He sets out to find it before it falls into the hands of the demented wizard Kalen. I was lucky enough to interview Trevor Story from Icon 64, who did the art and game concept for Soulless 2. My first question was pretty broad, with the original Soulless coming out almost a decade ago now. How much does he think the C64 retro scene has changed in that time? And Trevor said, there are definitely more development teams and a lot more publishers of 8-bit C64 stuff now. We also have a few dedicated C64 retro magazines with Fusion, Free 64, Zap 64, Italian Zap, Reset 64, just to name a few. Also, with the release of the C64 and the C64 Mini, a lot more people have returned to the C64, so the scene has grown quite a lot, which is great for us all. The game, like Sacred Armor of Antiriad, the inspiration for this game is a combination of exploration, puzzle solving, and a whole lot of action, and combines them excellently for its 4 massive levels. You start off with nothing and have to find a gun for defense, and once you gain the armor, you need to upgrade the suit with guns, and you also now gain the ability to fly and jump in and out of the suit to solve various puzzles and destroy enemies. My second question for Trevor was if he was a fan of the original Antiriad back in the day, and he said, Antiriad was a firm favorite for me and my mates when it came out. The artwork by Dan Malone was killer, and the awesome title music by Richard Joseph brings back great memories. It was fantastic, if short release. Each of the levels you go through has their own look and style, and also focus on a different part of the gameplay element. Level 1 is all about solving puzzles. Level 2 is exploration and discovery of the suit. Level 3 is all about big enemies to fight, etc, etc. It's done really well, and even though you're doing a bit of everything in all the levels, they still have their own identity. Gameplay is a great mix. Simple puzzle solving like matching colors, with statues to open paths to get keys. Action is really fun and fast, whether it's with your gun or with the suit weapon. It's very satisfying, blowing away everything, and the exploration element is great. The game does come with a map if you're easily lost, but I found I didn't really need it as the levels tended to be pretty logically set out. I also asked Trevor, with the size of the game being pretty large, I asked him how long the team had been working on this game for, and he said Jorg originally wanted to do a Metroidvania style game, so I designed Hyperium, which was pretty large. Sadly, this turned into a real slog and slowly we lost interest in the project, but I really wanted to do something along the lines, so I simplified the design and brought it back to flip screen. Then it turned into Soulless 2, and the idea to include the armor came about. We started in 2015 and finished in 2021 with a lot of gaps in development while we did other stuff. We still managed to cram a lot into the game, and it only just fit on one side of a disc. There are also plenty of secret rooms to discover that have enemies to kill who drop crowns. These crowns give you extra lives and are well worth seeking out. The Icon 64 team really delivered on this one yet again, with Jorg Rottensteiner on programming, Trevor on art and concept, and Soulcross on music and sound effects. My final question I asked Trevor was how difficult was it setting up the level design, as you had to get the combination of flying and walking right since most levels incorporate them. And he said, I really wanted each level to feel a bit different from the last. So the first level was designed as an on-foot level where you gain access to a weapon. The second level would be where you find the armor and can fly around and land. Third would have an interactive background pieces, which acted as enemies, and the fourth would have lots of mini-bosses to fight. Final boss was made a separate load, so it'd make it a more interesting battle, with a nice bitmap background. The room design changed as we tested, so you could mostly get around on foot. The only thing we had to really think about was the amount of sprites on screen, as you could exit your armor suit, so we had to come up with the ways to get around the sprite limit. We also added a few rooms in the second, third, and fourth levels that would randomize on each play. We had to lose the idea of saving any time, as too much info needed to be saved, so we went with a save on level completion instead. There's a lot of game to like here. The 4 levels are big and should offer plenty of challenge to keep you going for quite a while. The graphics are a great combination of high-res background and some superbly animated C64 sprite work, and the look of each level is very different from the last. My only slight niggle is the music seems a little bit too sedate for this kind of adventure. Souls tracks are good, but not very memorable, and there's not a single tune that I was humming after I turned off my C64. Still, they are pretty atmospheric, and I really did like the sound effects, which complemented the action really well. This game is another gem in the Icon N64's crown, and the game is both NTSC and PAL compatible, and works on everything from real hardware, VAS, and the C64 Mini and Maxi. It's not only an excellent homage to that Palace software classic, but takes all its shortcomings and makes a truly grand, fun adventure game that any C64 owner should be happy with.
And I'm sure you're probably wondering, where can I get these games?
The Sacred Armor of Antiriad, the original version, can be found on eBay, and I picked it up from the Retro Cabin, which is a UK online store worth checking out. It was relatively cheap. I bought the re-release. It was about $5 to $6, and you can also download a digital version from csdb.dk. As for Soulless 2, it's available from Cytronic Software, available in physical form on disc and USB as of making this video, and you can also download a digital version from Itch. I'll leave links to everything in the video description.
And that's it for today's episode. I just want to thank Trevor Story for answering the questions and giving us a little bit of an insight into the making of the game. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining me, Bastish B at 64K. I hope you had a good time. And if you can like and subscribe, they'll be greatly appreciated. And I'll see you next time. Cheers. Hey, Bastish B here for 64K, and welcome to another episode of New Retro. And if you've never watched this series before, then I take a look at a new retro game on an old system, and then we also have a look at the inspiration game, the game that might have inspired it. And today's games are... And welcome back. So let's first take a look at the original version of the game.
Supremacy, or Overlord as it's known in North America, was released in 1990, originally designed for the Amiga and Atari ST. The game was developed by the team at Probe, with publishing done by Virgin Games. This was an amazing game when it came out, a strategy game that had a unique visual and audio flair, two things that were almost never present in this genre of game during this period at least. It stood out and was a game even if the genre wasn't your style, you just had to respect. The goal of the strategy game is to conquer a group of planets in a certain sector of space and keep control of them. You're up against an opposing force who is trying to do the same, which leads to all-out planetary war. Both you and your opponent get to choose a starting planet in the sector. It's then basically a race to colonize the world before moving on to the next one until the whole sector is under your control. And of course you have to eliminate your opponent to reign supreme. There was tons of strategy involved and management aspects to the game that had you terraforming planets, keeping food supplies flowing, taxing the citizens, farming and mining for cash to buy troops and ships. There is a lot to do, and it seems a bit daunting the first time you play it, but it's still way more accessible than most games of this style, just due to the visual flair and the great icon-based menu system. All this leads to battles as you move from planet to planet, conquering worlds until you take out your opponent's home base. The game was worked on by some of the best talents the UK gaming scene has ever seen. We had David Perry and Nick Bruti on design. They also worked on Earthworm Jim and MDK together. Graphics saw the likes of Hugh Riley and Paul Doherty work on various versions of the game, having both worked on multiple classic System 3 games. And of course, one of the most memorable aspects is the absolutely excellent soundtracks provided by Sid Master Jerome Tell and David Whittaker on the Atari ST version. It was a dream team of talent, and the end product definitely shows. The C64 version, which was released in 1991, was something I played to absolute death and was every bit as good as its 16-bit big brothers as far as I'm concerned. It also received a 91% overall in Zap 64's issue number 74, and CU Amiga gave the Amiga version 93% overall. It was a game that represented the best the genre had to offer and still plays every bit as good now as it ever did.
And now let's check out the brand new release.
And now let's take a look at Supremacy, the 30th Anniversary Edition, which was released in November 2021 on the C64. This new version of the excellent Commodore 64 port has been lovingly updated and enhanced by the Cracking Group Access to celebrate the game's 30th anniversary. There truly was an epic amount of time and effort gone into this project, and I was lucky enough to speak with Mike Robertson, aka Knight Rider, of the group, and he'll be giving us a behind-the-scenes play-by-play of the entire update. And I'll now let him introduce himself.
My name is Mike Robertson, also known as Knight Rider, from the German Cracking Group Access. I have been a member since 2017. I was recruited as a sort of newly active scene in 2017. Historically, I started on the Commodore 64 probably around 1983, 1984 when I was at school. 1988, I would say, I upgraded to an Amiga and totally forgot about the C64. And then I remembered when I was sort of a teenager, I like to dabble on the sort of cracking scene and try to relearn what I'd long forgotten. I made some trainers just for myself and uploaded them to CSDB, and then obviously the other crackers in the current scene took an interest. One of the things which they encouraged me to do, which obviously no one else was doing at the time, was to look at Easy Flash releases. Easy Flashes gives you about 1 megabyte of additional memory, more or less, for the Commodore 64. The loading times are significantly faster. For people who are very impatient like me, it's a great improvement.
My introduction to Supremacy was actually through a bootleg version I got in 1991, which I got directly from the group Hotline, who did one of the many cracks of this game. My next door neighbor and myself played this game a lot. Despite not having the instructions, we were able to figure it out and sunk endless hours into it. I asked Mike what ultimately made them decide to update Supremacy.
During the COVID lockdown, we were all at home. There was no way for us to meet. Anyway, we all geographically lived relatively far away from each other, so we would have maybe one time a month or one time every 6 weeks, we would have a virtual pub meeting, and during the pub meeting, that's when Alex, also known as Retro Luzzer, came up with the concept Supremacy or Overlord, and how this was his favourite game, and he would really like to see some improvements made.
So besides Access's new trainer menu, which gives you the ability to select from a host of cheats if you're just no good at the game, and a pretty great helpful instruction manual as well, I asked Mark about some of the actual updates to the core of the game that the team made.
Loading and saving instead of loading to disk. The save state is so big it took absolutely ages to load and save. The second thing that he particularly felt was missing is there was one screen where you choose the current warrior. On the Amiga version, there were different warriors that could be selected. On the C64 version, it was fixed from the moment you actually choose your opponent. I cracked the game from original disk. I cracked initially the Overlord version, NTSC version, and sort of made some presentations about what potentially could be done. The HAL version was called Supremacy, and Alex kindly posted me the Supremacy disc, the original, and I cracked that. I disassembled it. I found out all of the pieces of code which were particularly interesting for me, and I said to Alex, okay, sort of what's the requirement? And then we went through and we talked in detail, and he said, okay, the Amiga has a fantastic intro which is clearly missing. There are certain screens which could really benefit from animation. It will give the atmosphere and so on a little bit more depth. So then I went together in sort of doing a sort of a proof of concept that proved that yes, this could be done. The animations could be built into the system, and that's when the two graphic artists came into play. So we have Salt, he's from Hungary, also known as SCSC. He did all of the spaceships and things like this. Did an absolutely fantastic job. He said to us he's never drawn a spaceship before in his life, and came up with the fantastic spaceships that we have there, and the terraformer and things like that. And then Domingo from Spain, he's also known as Almighty God. He came up with the animations for the soldier. He drew the weapons. He came up with some of the frames for the different walls and the levels. Salt, he also did some additional work. The animation for the intro. That for me was sort of a totally new world. I'd never really particularly done any animation on the C64 in terms of software sprites, because that's basically what it is. There's so much animation going on, you can't use hardware sprites. So I came up with a sort of a proof of concept with that, and it worked relatively well.
The amount of work that went into this, especially detail-wise, is pretty exceptional. Also, if you happen to have a C64 mouse, it's also now compatible with this device to get that game one more step closer to the Amiga Big Brother version, and that new intro is particularly awesome, which made me curious as to how long did the team actually work on this update for.
We've been working on it a long time. Some of the projects came in the meantime. For example, the fantastic bug fix version, the dual version of Time Soldier, which I actually did. Initially this came as a request on forum64.de. Someone said the loading times are pitiful, which of course they are. Can you make it as an easy flash version? Which I did very quickly, but however, during playtesting of the game was very hastily put together, had many bugs, and of course when you're creating a dual version you want to eliminate all those bugs.
With Access updating so many classic games, particularly in the last decade, I was curious if they'd ever reached out to the original teams or creators to see if they'd be willing to participate or get their blessing on the versions they were now creating.
We actually reached out to David Perry, the developer of the Amiga version of the software. He very kindly provided us a zip file with many assets in there. One of them was even called Source. As I mentioned previously, I moved from the Commodore 64 to the Amiga. In the Amiga scene, I was a cracker there. It's a lot more complicated than the 6502 opcodes, so I decided I don't really want to relearn 68,000 assembly language to maybe get a few tips, which I can probably a lot easier, a lot faster get from the disassembly of the C64 game. We also pestered like hell, droned hell. Eventually he replied to us. Eventually we convinced him that the 30-year anniversary version of Supremacy was coming out, and he would potentially do a rendition of the intro music. He did actually agree, but unfortunately that's all we ever heard from him again was his agreement. We sent him many reminders, asked him what the status is, asked him if we could help. We tried to persuade him with videos and clips of how we were progressing. Unfortunately that didn't work, and we had to get two other SID composers or SID musicians to assist.
It's overall another outstanding release, and I'd recommend it to anyone who played and loved this back in the day to check it out. I'll leave a link in the description for you to download it. I also did a video on the update of Turbo Outrun, so if you're interested in that, check that out as well. And here's Mark on his overall thoughts on the project.
Excess. Our motto is more than you deserve. I often say it, often with a little poke of irony. I enjoy my hobby, it's great fun. It's not more than you deserve, but we love to say it nevertheless. I'm really appreciating any feedback that I get via Facebook, via CSDB, and people leave nice comments that they really enjoy playing the games, the software and so on, which me and the team developed together. Behind me as well is the XS team. We have some really good testers. All our profiles are there on CSDB. You can look us all up. I don't take credit at all for the Supremacy release. I'm just one small cog in the machine. I'm the guy who did probably the easiest part, which was the programming. All the creative stuff was done by Alex Retroluzzer. It's his passion. And the graphics and the sound were done by other guys. There's a skill and a competence and an art which I simply don't have, and I thank them very much. A long, hard slog. At the end of the day, it's a hobby. We all have wives, children's, jobs, other things to do as well. So yeah, so to dedicate so much energy and passion and love, it's fantastic. So this is Knight Rider signing out. Goodbye. It's more than you deserve.
So if you've never played Supremacy before, it's an excellent strategy game for the C64. In fact, it's arguably one of the best. Extremely well balanced, and by this genre standards, very easy to get into and enjoy. And if you're going to play it, you might as well play this excellent version.
And that's it for another episode. Thanks for joining me, Bastish B, at 64K. I hope you had a good time. And if you can like and subscribe, that'll be greatly appreciated. I'll see you next time. Cheers.